Hi there sewists, Mary Rose here, and today I want to show you my process for making a t-shirt from start to finish on the serger. Now there will be a few techniques like top stitching and neckband binding that you can do on the domestic machine, but I wanted to focus mostly on the serger techniques for this tutorial. Now that doesn't mean you can't follow along on the domestic machine if you want to. Don't worry if you're a beginner, I'm going to go through every step slowly and give you my tips and tricks along the way. By the end, you should have a professional looking t-shirt that you're proud to wear. Before we get started, let's talk supplies. You'll need some matching thread, measuring tape, scissors, pins or clips, and of course you'll need a t-shirt pattern. I'm using a self-drafted pattern, but you can use whatever you have. And don't forget to use some ballpoint or stretch needles that matches the weight of your fabric. And of course, you'll need some fabric suitable for t-shirts. Upcycling a larger shirt would be a great idea. Knit fabrics aren't all the same. The amount of stretch varies a lot. So make sure that you match the stretch percentage from your pattern to your fabric. This fabric is 100% cotton, but due to the knit weave, it has quite a bit of stretch. I'll be using this fabric for the neckband as well, but you can also use rib knit fabric. Remember to pre-wash your fabric to avoid any shrinkage surprises later. Once it's washed and pressed, lay out your pattern pieces and cut carefully, making sure to copy all of your notches and match the grain line of the pattern pieces. It's important to cut the pattern so the direction of the greatest stretch follows the body horizontally. Looking at knits, it's easy to see the grain line, so we want to follow that for everything but the neckband, which gets cut on the cross grain, so the stretch follows the neckline. I'm also marking the wrong side of each of my sleeves since my fabric doesn't have a wrong side, just to make it easier for myself. If you want to do the optional neckband binding, cut a 1 1/4 strip of fabric the approximate length of the back of the neckline. I tend to eyeball it and cut it around 12 inches or the length of my ruler. You want to cut along the grain line like this so it's more stable when stretched. You can also cut smaller strips to stabilize the shoulder seams so they don't stretch out over time. Cut them the width of your seam allowance. I'll be using a 1/4 inch seam allowance for my t-shirt, which is the width of my serger overlock stitch, but you want to check your pattern so you can mark that width on the serger if needed when serging. Alright, with all the prep out of the way, let's head to the serger. I do have a video on threading this machine, so if you need any help, check that out. I'll link it in the description below. Now we're going to do the hems first, starting with the flatlock stitch. We need just the sleeves and the body pieces. I'm going to start by pressing my hems. Since I'm not doing this in the round, it's important to make sure that the sides match in size, so when they meet in the side seam, it looks flush. A good press also makes for a cleaner flatlock. Once you press the hems to the wrong side, you want to flip the fabric to the right side and press the hems inward to create a clean line on the end. This is how we're going to serge it through the machine. At the machine, turn off the knife and remove the right needle, changing the needle tension to the lowest setting and increase the lower looper tension. I like to start with the hems, even though you can serge the flatlock stitches in the round, because I like to get it out of the way early and you avoid obvious overlapping stitches. It's up to you how you want to hem. Check out my flatlock video if you want a more detailed tutorial for this method. Otherwise, you can use a zigzag stitch or a twin needle on your domestic machine and wait until the shirt is finished to hem. Or you can skip the hem entirely. Remember, this is your shirt. The magic of the flatlock happens when you pull down the hem and it flattens to reveal itself. Give it a good press and we can move on to constructing the shirt. Let's go over the sewing order before we begin. First, we serge the shoulder seams, creating the neckline. Then, we do the neckband and optional neckband binding. After that, we flat lay the sleeves into the body, and finally, we serge the side seams, finishing the shirt. With the hems done, let's switch our serger back to its normal settings for a 4-thread overlock stitch. Always use a scrap of fabric to test the settings of the machine, paying extra attention to the differential feed for knits. It should be between 1.25 and 1.75. The goal is to reduce the waviness of the seam. Here's an example at both 1 and 1.5. Do you see the difference? Now we'll serge the shoulder seams. Clip the shoulder seams together and apply the strip of fabric if you want on top. This will stabilize the shoulder seams so they don't stretch out over time. Line up your seam allowance, mine is just to the knife's edge, and make sure not to shift the 3 layers. Go as slowly as you need. After serging, I'm just going to trim the ends since they'll both be encased in seams in later steps. Press the shoulder seams towards the back, and you can top stitch it if you like on the domestic machine. I've done this with other t-shirts, it just depends on the vibe I'm going for. Here's an example of a shirt I've added top stitching to. Next, we'll prepare the neckband. Serge the ends of the neckband right sides together and head to the iron. You'll want to move half of the seam allowance towards one side and press it down. This helps the neckband be flat. Press the neckband in half, right sides out. I also like to baste the neckband edges if it's a very stretchy fabric or tends to roll at the edge, using a very long basting zigzag stitch on my domestic machine. We'll attach the neckband next. Start by quartering the neckband, marking with clips or chalk. Then we'll do the same thing to the shirt, using the seams to find the centers. Match the center back and front to find the quarters. The shoulder seams are not equidistant, as you can see. Alright, next you want to clip the neckband to the shirt, starting at the center front and back and doing the quarters. After the quarters, you can optionally divide it even further. You will notice that the neckband is smaller than the shirt fabric, and it can be hard to find the centers. So what I like to do oftentimes is put it on my leg and stretch the fabric so it's all the way even from clip to clip, and then clip directly into the center. You can also do this on the table, as you can see, but it's a little bit harder. To be more secure when serging, you can hand base the neckband or use a long zigzag to base it on the domestic machine if you're new to inserting a neckband. Start at the back of the neckband seam with the neckband on top. I like to start right before the neckband seam and ease my serging to the full seam allowance when hitting that spot. Use the clips as anchors and stretch the neckband to fit, but make sure you aren't stretching the shirt too. As you're serging, you're going to approach the shoulder seam, and it's good to check and make sure that it's pointed in the correct direction towards the back of the shirt. I had to fix mine. Serge in the round slowly, making sure you overlap the stitching by about an inch or so at the end, keeping away from the knives so you don't cut previous stitches. You can weave your thread tail in, but I'm going to trim it since I'm covering this with the binding. After serging the neckline, you're going to want to press the seam allowance downward. I like to do this on the inside so I don't make the front shiny. Be very careful if your fabric has poly content. For this optional step, the neckband binding, you will need a domestic machine. I like to add a knit band to the back of the t-shirt to prevent stretching out over time. This can also be done with twill tape and the like. Press the strip in half, folding in one raw edge to start. For the neckband binding, you're going to want to line up the pressed edge to one of the shoulder seams to start. Then sew it to the serge neckband seam. Try to match the stitches of the seam allowance or make it narrower. You don't want to take width from the neckband when stitching. Make sure you fold under the end when you meet the shoulder seam. I like to press the neckband seam down and understitch the binding to the seam allowance using my stitch in the ditch foot. This keeps the band flat and easier for the next step. Then I'll fold over the band covering the seam, clip or pin if needed. The fabric will stretch since it's cut on grain, and edge stitch the band down. I like to use the straight stitch foot because it helps with the 1/4 inch guide. These stitches will be visible on the back of the collar, so take your time and use a longer straight stitch, or my preference, the triple stretch straight stitch, which visually reminds me of a chain stitch, the more commercial option. This stitch has more stretch and is good if you need the neckband to stretch over the head easier. Backstitch at the ends. Just like with the shoulder seams, you have the option to top stitch the neckline, as you can see. I chose to do a smaller 1/8 of an inch top stitching because my seam allowance is only 1/4 of an inch, and that makes it different between the front and the back. But if you have a longer seam allowance, you can just top stitch it all the way 1/4 of an inch. After the neckband, we'll attach the sleeves. I like to do this part while the shirt is still flat. It's much easier than setting in a sleeve. Clip to match all the notches. Use as many clips or pins as you need. Like before, use the clips as anchors as you run it through the serger. Press the seam towards the sleeve when done. Finally, we'll sew up those side seams. Make sure when pinning or clipping, the intersection of the seams under the arm are going in opposite directions. Like so. This makes it easier for the seams to meet. Taking a little extra care here will give your t-shirt a professional finish. Since I already hemmed my shirt, I'm going to do a catch stitch with the serger tails at both the start and end so I don't have to lock it in with my domestic. To start, make sure you have a good tail length and stitch a couple stitches into the seam and stop with the needle down. Raise the presser foot and pull the tail to align with the seam path. And keep serging an inch or so. And cut the tail off. This will lock the tail into the top and give a clean look from the outside. To finish, serge right past the seam with the needle up, and flip the project trying to align the top of the seam with the needle. Serge another inch and then serge off and trim. This technique can take a few tries to get used to, but it saves me an extra step. And there you have it, a t-shirt made using the serger. I hope this tutorial has shown you just how achievable this project is, even for beginners. Once you feel comfortable with the process, there's lots of ways to customize the t-shirt to make it perfect for you, including fit, cut, sleeve type, length, color blocking, just to name a few. Eventually, you'll be able to create the perfect clothing that works just for your style, and the best part is you've made it yourself. Thanks for serging with me today. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please like and subscribe for more sewing content. If you have any questions, drop a comment below and I'll be happy to get back to you. Happy serging!